good evening. Our guest speaker today was born on 22nd April 1945 in Delhi in British India. He graduated with a master's degree in English literature from St. Stephen's College of Delhi University. He joined IAS as officer in 1968 and served in Tamil Nadu till 1985. He was then made Secretary to Vice President of India, Joint Secretary to the President, and finally Secretary to the President of India in 1997. He became Minister of Culture in High Commission of India in UK and Director of the Nehru Centre in London. He is currently a distinguished Professor of History and Politics at Ashoka University in Delhi. He has talked against the distrust between different political entities and personalities, and also within institutions such as our universities, which can all disfigure life in our country. He has called for a change in our conditioned mindsets to make true progress in our country. While in Kolkata, he once said modestly that he is only a drop in the Bay of Bengal. Truly, the spirit of that drop has spread to the shores of Sri Lanka, South Africa, Norway, Iceland, and all over the world. He may not be a member of the Theosophical Society, but is certainly a living theosophist who epitomizes our motto, there is no religion higher than truth. Brothers and sisters, a top-ranking IAS officer, an effective administrator, a diplomat, a High Commissioner to Sri Lanka and South Africa, an ambassador of India to Norway and Iceland, an orator of repute who has spoken internationally, a playwright and an author of various books, a writer of more than 100 articles for Hindustan Times, a distinguished professor, an educationist, a chairman of Kalakshetra, a chairman of Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, and I can go on, all woven into one human body and named by the world Mr. Clean or Gopalkrishna Gandhi. The introduction is over now, but I must add that he also has Rajagopalachari or Rajaji as his maternal grandfather and Mahatma Gandhi as his paternal grandfather. Like grandfathers, like grandson, he is the right person to talk to us on whether our conscience is dead today or not. Mr. Gandhi.
International President of the Theosophical Society, Mr. Tim Boyd, Theosophist delegates to this convention, ladies and gentlemen. The introduction that you have just heard had only one relevant line in it, and by relevant I mean only one line in it which marks me out from dozens upon dozens of administrators and diplomats. Everyone has only one set of grandparents. They do not choose their offspring. The offspring do not choose their grandparents and parents. I know that if I command even a fraction of a moment's attention anywhere, it is because I am descended from two grandfathers whose names were mentioned to you. But if I am speaking on a subject which has the word conscience in it, I must say at the very outset that descended as I am from Mohandas Gandhi, I am not a Gandhian by any stretch of imagination. I do not even know what being Gandhian means. I do not know what Gandhism means. I am compelled by honesty to say to all of you that please delete from your minds this genealogical fact. I am speaking to you today on a subject which is of importance to all of us as human beings, as it is important to me. Honesty compels me to say this as well, that every day is a challenge to one's conscience. Not just because of what one may do wittingly or unwittingly as a person, but because of what one does as a member of a part of creation which uses its dominant place on this planet, sometimes knowingly, but very often unknowingly, to trample upon, exploit, and misuse other parts of creation. This is not to stoke a guilt conscience in anyone, because as I said, very often we do harm to this planet and its other creations without really intending to do so. The opposite of conscience, or the opposite of a person with an active conscience, is not what one may imagine it to be, namely a person who has no conscience, a person who has no qualms of conscience, a person who works and acts and thinks and lives without moral considerations. This is not the opposite of conscience. The opposite of conscience is the absence of any interest in having a conscience. It is an exemption given to oneself to not have a conscience. It is also one other thing. The opposite of a person of conscience is a person who does not really care about conscience, about moral considerations, but wants to pass off as a person who has a very active conscience. The opposite pole of a person of conscience is the hypocrite who wants to pretend that she or he is highly moral or morally motivated. That is the opposite of conscience. I think the person who wants to be treated morally seriously has only two options. One is to actually feel that morality matters to that person, to myself, and to try to live according to that moral measure. The other is to just pretend to be very moral. God men and God women, of whom there is no dearth in India, frighten me. I run away from somebody who is supposed to be a holy person, because I do not really know whether that person is holy or not, and I am scared to find beneath the veneer of holiness the opposite of holiness, because I am not prepared to give up my faith in what is holy, in what is sacred, in what is moral. The prospect of disappointment from a person who strikes a moral tone prospect is chilling to me. I would rather spend time with a person who has no moral pretensions, who claims nothing by way of a conscience-led life. I would far rather spend time with such a person than somebody who has a halo around her or his head and walks as if this planet has been made for the footfall of her or his lotus feet. Friends, I do not know. Really, I do not know why I am not seated where all of you are seated, listening to somebody rather than speaking to you. I take it as my good luck, also as my great responsibility. And I will therefore spend the next few minutes, not too many, I assure you, to explore the meaning and the future, the present, the past, and the future of conscience. There is in all of us an inner core, something we carry inside us, like we sometimes carry or wear a locket with a little image inside it, which could be an image of a human being, not of a divine being, or an amulet or a charm. There is something within us, that little grotto, that little shrine, which is a constant accompanist of all our thoughts. Just as we forget the locket, we forget that grotto. But it is there. I would like to share with you the Hindi, Sanskrit-derived Hindi for conscience, which is Antaratma, which is something inside, the inner soul, the inner being. And the Tamil, which is Manasakshi. Manasakshi, the Tamil word which is part Tamil and part Sanskrit, but almost wholly Sanskrit, but currently and commonly and intensively used in Tamil. Manasakshi, which means the mind's witness, the mind as witness. The mind as witness. There are several theories of mind. I cannot be presumptuous enough to speak to this audience about the mind. But the mind is something different from the brain, as we know, different from the heart, as we know. The home of thought and feeling together. And that home of thought and feeling together, of insight and intuition, of intelligence and instinct, is the mind's witness. That is the conscience. And what is that conscience doing? What is that mind's witness witnessing? Many of you have studied history systematically. Many of you have been witnesses to history. All of us are part of the unfolding scroll of history. So we are part of history. I would say that history tells us that conscience has never been at ease. It has been there, but it has never been happy. I do not think there was ever a time when the human conscience was at peace. But the fact that the human conscience has been troubled is as important, and in my mind as hope-giving, as a possible peaceful conscience. The conscience as mind's witness should not be asleep. It should be alert, and it should be troubling the owner of that entire entity called the human being. But it has not been troubled to find an end to its troubles. It has been troubled to trouble and to continue to trouble every entity that it is owned by. I think the diabolisms of the human brain, the incredible calculations of the human mind as opposed to the conscience, as opposed to the witness of the mind, that has probably never been equaled or exceeded as it has been in the last century. There is no getting away from the fact that the Holocaust was a nightmare of nightmares, so quickly followed by Hiroshima, the nightmare of nightmares as well. But we should not forget that the incredibly monstrous acts of single individuals were propped up by the collective support of several, amongst whom were scientists, amongst whom were administrators and politicians. Why they could overcome the promptings of the mind's witness to subject themselves and subordinate themselves to the diabolical will of a political system or a political dictator is beyond comprehension. But they did. Biological weapons, chemical weapons, and nuclear weapons have been created by the human intellect, putting the mind's witness, the manasakshi, within a vault that is completely impregnable to that mind. It has imprisoned all that can be called manasakshi to produce these weapons of mass destruction. But we should also be aware of the fact that the world has known this, been horrified by it, and has also proceeded with limited success, and sometimes with success that was reversed into unsuccess, to curb the manufacture of such weapons. That there is an international convention to reverse the world's stockpile of biological and chemical weapons, and to bring about, in some extremely unconvincing ways, the dismantling of nuclear warheads. That very fact gives us hope. That somehow the great tussle between the mind's witness and the demon in the mind, that tussle is constant. Every winter in Chennai, in Madras, if this season can indeed be called winter, sees the International Convention of Theosophists, sees a great articulation of Carnatic music and also of dance and drama. Yesterday, my wife and I were fortunate to see the production of a small section, but the crowning section of the Ramayana in Kalakshetra. And there, the Prince of Ayodhya says three things which struck me as being representative of the mind's witness of the Manasakshi and of the Antaratma. He is on the verge of victory. He has instruments of war no less potent than the BCN, war weapons of our time. But when Ravana has been stricken, he looks at him and says, "You are tired. I have struck you. But it is going to be night and dark. It is not right for me to kill you as I can kill you when you are weak and it is night. Go and come back tomorrow, refreshed in your chariot, when we shall meet as equal combatants again." Now that was the mind's witness, the Manasakshi speaking to him. He could have finished the story. But the author of the Ramayana was not giving us a Superman story or a Spider-Man story. He was giving us a story with a moral tale. And this was one. The other was when he says, after Ravana has been killed, he tells Ravana's younger brother, "Death seizes all enmity. Enmity goes with death. I do not now regard your brother as an enemy." Third, speaking in the language of a state, Rama says, "I accept you, Vibhishana, who is the brother of Ravana, coming, surrendering himself for sanctuary." Rama tells him, "I, Rama, accept you because you have come for sanctuary. I believe that those who come seeking sanctuary should be given sanctuary." So even a state has a moral witness inside it. Today, the United States has a position on immigration. Myanmar, the home of the Buddha, has sent hundreds of Rohingyas out of Myanmar. Repatriates and refugees from Sri Lanka have come to us. And in the borders of India and Pakistan, refugee relocation is one of the bitterest trails of history. The conscience of our communities, of our nations, has been ignored by states, but no less by society, by individuals. 1984, when there were riots in Delhi, the victims of which were predominantly Sikhs, not predominantly, wholly Sikhs. A large number of people came to help them, gave them shelter, like a state would in their homes, gave them succor. But a large number, an even larger number, did not. Did I do anything? I did not. I was in Chennai. Did I do anything when similar things have happened in my vicinity? I have not. That is the reality of conscience. We have examples of the conscience working. We have examples of the conscience sleeping. We have both. So where does this picture of inhumanity and humaneness refract into a pattern? Does it? I wish to take a few more minutes to conclude my observations. And I will start by saying that I have no thesis to share, and I have no antithesis to propagate. I am sharing a few thoughts with all of you in the knowledge that theosophy and theosophists have been inquiring the link between creation and created, between morality and human life, between spirituality and the greatest product of spiritual thought, namely philosophy. And all of you are doing that on a scale that is probably unprecedented. I'd like to just say this, that conscience is incapable of dying. It cannot die. But conscience is incapable of security and safety either. It is being undermined and sabotaged by each one of us, not just by society, by dictators, by tyrants, but by each one of us, all the time. One should not trivialize something as serious as conscience by saying conscience cannot die, but it is always in an emergency ward. I should not give that medical analogy for two reasons. One is that a conscience is too serious a subject to be placed at the feet of an idle metaphor. And the other is that somebody or anybody who is in an ambulatory crisis and in a theater of emergency is not meant to be used metaphorically. But you know what I mean. The conscience of humanity, conscience of human beings is in peril. And I would like to say that its being in peril is not meant to make us alarmed. I think it is meant to make us reflect. The template of crime has changed. If the mind is a witness to human imperfections, to human foibles and follies, it is not aided by a fixed penal code. That template keeps changing. Yesterday's so-called crimes are not today's so-called crimes. Yesterday's so-called sins, a word that I dislike with intensity, sins, are no longer regarded today as sins. But supposing the judge, the moral witness who is also the jury and the judge, supposing that judge was to be told, you have no code, you have no law, you have no template before you to find the person guilty or not guilty. Go only by your own conscience. Will the judge vacate her or his seat? No. A conscientious judge does not need those templates. This is not a legal court. This is a moral court. And that judge will say, I still have something in me. My inner core, my monitor, which tells me right from wrong. That line, I know where it lies. And I will judge this case by that. That is where we are today. As individuals, as society, and as the international community of states. where there is a constant flux, where laws are changing, disappearing, where the penology of states is changing, but where something in the human conscience, in the human consciousness, remains alert and alive. I want to conclude by an analogy which is so well known as to be almost trite. Today, the lines of crime and punishment have blurred. There is such a thing as the Afghan war document. There is something as the Iraq war log. There are things which the United States has done or which the United States could be deeply embarrassed by. But then comes Julian Assange. He hacks, breaks into what is supposed to be completely secret and exposes that crime. A thief who breaks into your house and steals your money is a thief of your money. But if a person breaks into a record that shows you to be evil, is the person who has created the evil culpable, or is the person who has used the methods of interception secretly culpable? Crime exposing crime. We do not know in our situation today right from wrong. We are living in an age of doubt, where uncertainty has become standard, where verities have faded, where belief has been undermined and faith is in retreat. Ours is above all the age of doubt. It is an age of questioning. And so, 25 years ago, if somebody was speaking here on the subject, is conscience dead? That person would have either said, conscience is dead, or would have said, conscience can never die. But today, all I can say is that conscience is in peril. And we do not know. Today, crime from crime, horror from horror. Tennyson's great lines. Among many lines of Tennyson which are great, that there lives more faith in honest doubt than in half the world's creeds. But honest doubt is one thing. Lurching in doubt is another. And we cannot lurch in doubt. We must remember this above all, that the ability to distinguish right from wrong is ingrained in us, is part of our chemistry for reasons which we cannot fathom, from childhood to any stage in age. And that is something we cannot afford to lose. Yes, conscience is not dead. Therefore, what do we do? Just examine in ourselves the one fundamental which distinguishes us from all other creations which we hold captive to us, over which we seem to want to exercise colonial and imperial power. And that is this: I do not know Sanskrit, and I do not like to quote Sanskrit, which I know, the little of which I know, for fear of sounding pedantic. Pedantry is a cousin of hypocrisy, and knowledge can be very easily made a handmaiden of pedantry. So I will not quote this, but I will paraphrase it. Hunger, sleep, fear, and lust are common to all living beings, perhaps excluding plant life. The only thing that distinguishes the human from other living beings, the human who has all these four, is a sense of responsibility. Today, we may not have a Hitler amongst us, though we have many with Hitlerian instincts. Today, there may not be a president who is going to drop a nuclear bomb on our heads as easily as was done in 1945, though the bombs exist. But in the way we have completely committed our planet to a future of self-annihilation by greed, and sheer greed is the biggest dullening of the collective conscience that can be imagined. Today, perhaps, more than war is the possibility of collective suicide. We in the sylvan atmosphere of the Theosophical Society may be unaware of this, or temporarily unaware of this fact, that water is disappearing from access. And by water I mean the water that we would give to our children and grandchildren. The soil on our earth, technically called topsoil, is disappearing. The biggest squandering of the moral witness of our times is the squandering of our responsibility towards this planet. Our conscience has all but died when it comes to our awareness of what we are doing to our own future. And that is horrifying. Patricide is known. Regicide is known. Suicide is known. But the murdering of unborn children is the stain on our times which no conscience can permit. But our conscience today is being witnessed to, speechless as it is, powerless as it is. But whether it is hopeless or not is in the hands of all of us, including this small product of the accidents of birth and chance, who has taken the last 45 minutes of your time in self-fulfilling verbosity.
On behalf of all the delegates to this international convention, I would like to thank Mr. Gopalkrishna Gandhi for coming to Adyar and delivering his address on Is Conscience Dead? Thank you very much, sir. I declare this session closed.